On self-consciousness and being. Anyone that has taken up this work seriously, then reflected upon it, by that faculty we all possess but rarely use, namely thinking for oneself, should be capable of entering consciously into an understanding of the position of others. This is a development of being, essential for us in the work, as no one can develop alone. Relationship is possible only through the contact of inner worlds, and we truly meet only through our inner worlds. To understand another, you must enter into their inner world, however this is not possible if you have not entered your own inner world. The first step therefore towards entering consciously into, and understanding the position of another, is attained through entering into, and understanding the position of oneself, and unless this step is taken, to as full a degree as possible, then there is little or no possibility of entering into and understanding the position of another person. The entry into oneself begins with self-observation, and the understanding of oneself comes gradually through self-study, in the light and knowledge of this teaching, whose ultimate aim is the gradual but definite transformation of oneself. For this reason, simply to think that we are capable of entering into and understanding the position of another person, perhaps even giving help, such as we are, and this illusion is very common, is to misunderstand entirely the nature of human contact. The universal difficulties that attend this impulse, which so frequently end in disaster, or some sort of compromise, which as often as not, is the breeding ground of bitterness, mutual criticism, hostility, and even worse emotional states or trains of thought. No one, such as they are mechanically, as formed by life and its influences, can enter into and understand another, and from that, give any sort of help, unless they already know from their own self-observation, self-study, insight, and work on themselves, what is in that other person. Hence only through direct self-knowledge, is knowledge of others practically possible. Only by seeing, knowing and understanding what is in yourself, can you see, know, and understand what is in another person. One of the greatest evils of human relationship is that people make no attempt to enter into one another's position, but merely criticize without restraint. They do not possess any inner check to this mechanical criticism, owing to an absence of insight into themselves, and their own glaring crudities, faults or shortcomings. As a result, not only do they not help one another, but the normal balance of things is upset, and by this is meant that an accumulation of wrong or evil psychic material is formed daily in human relationships, in fact in everyone's life. This would never exist if people saw themselves, and others, simultaneously, which would neutralize the effects of their conduct, day by day. This lack of psychological responsibility, both to ourselves and to others, is particularly characteristic of modern life, and the source of one part of the widespread unhappiness that marks the present age, in which, amongst other things, there is a decline in even ordinary human kindness. This results in hardness, which is among the most dangerous factors with regard to the future, and which effectually stops all possibility of the right development of emotional life. People in this work, who have a chance of emotional development, should particularly observe silent or expressed criticism of others, as a persistent wrong factor in themselves, which continually is making wrong psychic material in them, then sincerely reflect upon what they are doing. In many cases, stupidity, thick-headedness and ignorance are underlying causes, but many contributing factors exist, as an unusual degree of vanity and self-complacency abound. Of feeling that one is in the right, or self-meritoriousness, feelings of virtue and superiority, are other factors of this kind, which of course bar the way to inner self-change. This is mentioned particularly with regard to a mechanical feeling of merit and self-excellence, in those who expect others to change, but do not start from themselves. Who judge of the work by its effects on others, without apparently realizing that they have much work to do on themselves, at their own level, before they can pass judgment on others. They despair that other people are judging them in precisely the same way as they judge others, a fact which always surprises them. Mechanical criticism of others produces a great many psychological difficulties in the person who criticizes, because of wrong eyes, which hinder our own inner development and freedom. What is implied is that if we allow critical and negative eyes to develop freely in ourselves, then they will turn on us in the work, and hinder our own understanding, hence our own development. What you do to others, you do to yourself. Everything is arranged in this way. Everything wrong gradually reacts on yourself in this work. After a time we realize that we cannot afford to sleep too much, to talk and act mechanically, and permit our life to be in the hands of wrong eyes. We begin to see for ourselves that we must really live more consciously, with regard to our inner world, in which all past accounts must eventually be settled. To live more consciously in our inner world is not to go with bad eyes, to begin with. As our grandparents cautioned, mind the company that you keep. Remember that if we are in this work, then we are putting ourselves under more laws than others, under the laws of the work. We are putting ourselves into a position in which we must obey what the work advises. The purification of our emotional life in this work can perhaps artificially be divided into two sides, for the purposes of practical self-observation. Hence we can deal first with our emotions arising from false personality, or imaginary I. Because this imaginary, oneself, to which this work is constantly calling our attention, and which should be a matter of daily self-study, and of real practical work. In view of the fact that it is the source of so much daily misunderstanding and unhappiness, so much offense and wiseacrery, this thing, formed by ourselves, and by the environmental influences of our upbringing, the thing which rests, like a colored bubble on the surface of our psychic life, the tinted lenses through which our worldview evolves, confuses and distorts the whole of our inner life. It forms a part of our acquired being. The fundamental causes of almost all the misunderstandings arising in our inner space, as well as the sphere of everyday life, the possibility of human relationship between us, is this psychic factor called false personality, which is formed in the preparatory school of life. The stimulation of this psychic factor in a person, both before and during the period of responsible life, gives rise to the emotions of vanity and self-conceit. These emotions, arising from the stimulation of our false personality, stand in the way of the normal development of emotional center. It can also be noted that they stand in the way of any development of consciousness as well. These impediments prevent the third state of consciousness, a state of self-awareness, which represents that degree of happiness and of self-consciousness which exists in a real person, and which fosters peaceful common human coexistence. It depends entirely upon the absence in us of vanity, and more importantly self-conceit. These emotions can take very subtle forms, and require long, sincere inner observation, a great deal of insight and gradual self-realization. People even imagine they have not got them, although they are constantly being offended, and upset by what others say, or by the way they are treated. They do not see that this has any connection with their own vanity or self-conceit at all. This is identifying, and after a time, when buried conscience begins to awaken, these emotions can be felt by their inner taste. They are impure emotions. This indeed is what is mostly meant in religious writings by impurity, and what in the Gospels is so much attacked as in the case of the Pharisees, who do everything to be seen of men. Out of vanity and self-conceit. We know that when we are doing good to others, and feel merit, it is our self-love that we are doing good to. This is impurity in our emotions. If we do a thing objectively, simply out of the love of it, then it is pure. Unfortunately, however, this happens as a rule only in connection with satisfying our appetites. The second factor, with regard to the purification of emotional life, is, as we all know, the factor of negative emotions. These cannot be expanded upon, except to remind ourselves that they take many subtle forms. After a time they can be recognized by their inner taste, as they all smell badly. Remember too that at birth we possess no false personality. That born amongst sleeping people, who enjoy their negative emotions, a child acquires them, as by infection. The pleasure people take in being negative is imitated by their children, and at the same time, the formation of false personality in a child assists the process, because through the emotions of vanity and self-conceit, the means of being easily offended are formed in all their endless diversity. Our level of being is characterized by the impure state of emotional life described. Work on being, with regard to our emotional center, demands, among other things, effort to observe and realize the existence of these emotions in oneself, noticing their origin, and the course that they take, the effects they give rise to. When we are properly conscious of something in ourselves, we are on the way to changing it. The consciousness of it, alone, if it is full enough, will begin to change us. Once we have seen something in ourselves, in our being, clearly enough, then it will lead to our seeing something else. Understand then that being must change and change definitely in everyone, without exception, and it must change right here, right now. Religious people often suppose they will be changed in some mystical hereafter, or they imagine that, just as they are, with the level of being that they have, with all their negative emotions, vanity, self-conceit, malicious talking, jealousies, unpleasant curiosities, and so on, that they can reach and stand in the presence of God. There are many other similar illusions, all of which are due to not seeing one's level of being, that actually determine exactly where we are situated, in the scale or ladder of all kinds of being, reaching all the way up to the highest divine presence. Everyone is at some place in this ladder. In this work, on the psychological side, we are given knowledge about how to change being, and this knowledge should be applied to our own being, through observing ourselves in accordance with what that knowledge tells us to observe. From this, we get knowledge of our being, and so can begin to work on it. If we begin to possess some real knowledge of our own being, and have worked on it, then we will be able to enter into, and understand the position of another person, and so to help them, but only in so far as the knowledge of ourselves, and of our own difficulties goes. Among other things, we should be able to know when we are speaking from vanity, or a sense of superiority, from a negative feeling, from the desire to hurt someone else, or merely to criticize, to be vindictive and so on. We should be able to distinguish between the pure and impure in ourselves better, and from this, be able to speak more simply to one another. If while we are speaking, we see in ourselves what we are seeing in the other, then we will speak truthfully, or more sincerely, as what is pure in this sense, cannot hurt another, or offend them, but may actually help. If we do not know, at the time that we are speaking to another, whether we speak rightly, yet speak with the double consciousness of ourselves and of the other person, which is speaking in a state of self-remembering, namely, looking in and out simultaneously, then we will know later, through aftertaste and reflection. The work will show us, for everything done sincerely, from the feeling of the work, will be preserved for us, and shown, through reflection in its right light, if we listen and do not fall asleep. It is noted widely, that in religious teaching, many things are said about being. People are divided according to their state of being, into saints and sinners, bad or good, and so on. Many things are said in the Gospels that refer to states of being. In the parable of the sower, sowing the seed of the word of God in mankind, the different categories of men mentioned are divided according to their being, in relation to the seed of the word, to their reception of it. In another place, men with wrong being are called thorns or thistles, in the passage where the Christ says, "Do men gather grapes of thorns, or figs of thistles?" Men are then compared by Christ, with regard to their level of being, with trees, and it is said, "Every good tree brings forth good fruit, but the corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit." All this means that the level of being for anyone is of the greatest importance. As we know, it is necessary to think about a person's level of being, before we bring them into this work. Something very serious is meant here, and by now we should begin to grasp what it is. The tendency today to make criminals into heroes is entirely wrong. So there are two signs of being with regard to people that we might wish to bring into the work. They must be responsible people, and they must have some sort of magnetic center. Apart from the idea of good householder and magnetic center, a person entering the work should have a natural sense of shame. We all know that many so-called moral defectives have no sense of shame, and this is a very poor sign. Then notice that by being hard, through sassiness and wiseacrery, by never feeling shame, we arrest the development of our own being. People entering the work should have some sense of faith, some trace in their lives of a religious impulse, of course, connected with magnetic center, and with past influences or education. Then they should feel something of mortality, have some awareness of their own mortality. All these factors, and several others, form starting points in their being, from which ideas and teachings of the work can develop further.